All right, submit of the week, and we got the Wednesday edition of the Morning Pitt here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's the post-game Morning Pitt show, I guess if you want to call it that. It's probably the first thing you're listening to or watching or checking out this morning in the wake of Pitt's win last night against Georgia Tech. Panthers get back in the win column, bounce back from their loss at Virginia Tech on Saturday. They beat the Yellow Jackets last night 76-68 at the Petersen Events Center. Lots to say about that one. Lots of topics to cover with regards to that game. But of course, we have to ask you right off the bat to like and subscribe. Like this video as you're watching it. Click the subscribe button too if you have not. There's like 40% of you watching this video right now who are not subscribed to our YouTube channel. What are you doing? Hit the subscribe button. We're so close to 3,000 subscribers. So do your part. Help me out. Hit the subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything. It's not going to compel you to anything. It's not going to lead you down a dark path that you never want to return from. It's just going to help our numbers look better on YouTube, which we're trying to do here. So make sure you like this video and subscribe, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And of course, check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. You know the spiel. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. All right there at Panther-Lair.com, and message boards where you can talk with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans. I mean, you want to talk about the Pitt game after the game, this is your opportunity to do it. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. So, lots to say about that game last night, about Pitt's win over Georgia Tech. Bouncing back, not letting the loss at Virginia Tech kind of, snowball and turn into more losses or a losing streak or anything like that. And obviously there's a lot of factors, a lot of elements of that game that we have to discuss, and we'll get to them. And I think there are a lot of sort of, very specific and very current and important, relevant points to bring out about that game and what it means for Pitt's path over the remaining three games of the regular season, heading into the ACC tournament and beyond. We'll talk about all those things. We'll cover all those things. There's a lot to talk about on this Morning Pitt for sure. But I have to start big picture. I have to start with something that, Nellie Cummings and Jeff Cable both sort of predictably announced and proclaimed that they don't care about. But I do care about it. It's getting to 20 wins. And just like it mattered when Pitt clinched a winning record earlier this season, just like it mattered when they set a new record for wins in wins in ACC games, just like it'll matter when they make the NCAA tournament for the first time, it matters that they got to 20 wins. It really does. And even though they have 3 games left in the regular season, they have the ACC tournament, NCAA tournament, all these things, it matters right now that Pitt is a 20-win team. Because for the longest time, for as long as I can remember watching college basketball, 20 wins was a benchmark to reach. Good teams won at least 20 games. And sometimes bad teams too. I mean, you could pad your schedule as such to make it happen, but teams, if you can get to 20 wins, you accomplish something that season. For all the good or the bad that might have come before it, or when you look at the season as a whole, there might be some ups and some downs, but if you got 20 wins, you had a better than solid season. You had a good season. That was always that number to shoot for. I mean, there was a theory back in after the 2012-13 season that Jamie Dixon accepted the invitation or compelled Pitt to pay for the invitation to the CBI simply because he was sitting at like 17 wins. And he had this streak of 20-win seasons that he didn't want to lose. And they ended up winning 5 games in the CBI. I actually forgot. I looked that up just to double check on how many wins they ended up with. They ended up winning 22 games that year. They played friggin' 6 games in the CBI. It's ridiculous. I can't believe there were 6 CBI games that we all watched. Pitt went 5-1. They lost the one game, but ultimately won the CBI and got 5 wins and bumped up the win total to get over 20 wins. I mean, it mattered that much. I mean, that was the original Mike Tomlin's never had a losing season was Jamie Dixon's never fallen below 20 wins. And I think it still stands today as a benchmark, as a target of okay, once you pass this point, you've had a good season, or at least an above average season, a season that's better than solid, with a good likelihood of being a good season and borderline, to a great season or a special season. That crossing that benchmark, to me, I think is the most significant benchmark Pitt has passed so far this year. And they passed a few, like we talked about, with clinching the winning record and setting a new record for wins in the ACC. Getting to 20 wins, I think, was that next sort of milepost along the way. And winning, a couple games in the ACC tournament, maybe having some success there, maybe getting the highest seed they've ever gotten in the ACC tournament, and then making it back to the NCAA tournament for the first time in 7 years. I mean, those things are all laying out there still, and they're the next steps that that Pitt will have. Those are the next benchmarks that Pitt will reach. But this one's a big one. I really think it is. And yeah, Nellie Cummings said, yeah, that's fine, but we're focused on right now. We're focused on what we need to do. We still have more work to do. Jeff Capel said, yeah, it's nice, but it's hard for us to reflect on that right now because we still have a game. We have a big game coming up on Saturday and 2 more big games coming up after that. And they're right. And that's good. And that's what they should say. And that's where their focus should be. And I'm glad that it is. But it doesn't matter if you and I focus on this. It doesn't matter if you and I focus on the accomplishments that this team has already, reached, and what it means for the program, and how this year is such a significant improvement over the previous 6 seasons. I mean, 7 years ago was a long time ago. The 2015-16 season, Jamie Dixon's final year at Pitt, was a long time ago. And that was the last time Pitt had a 20-win season. It was the last time Pitt made the NCAA tournament. Now, this team has crossed one of those things off the list, and it's well on its way toward crossing the other off the list. And so for whatever we want to say about last night's game, and like I said, we've got plenty to say about it and what it means for the rest of the season and how it's going to impact the game against Syracuse and Notre Dame and Miami and the ACC tournament, the NCAA tournament, all those different things. And we'll talk about all those different things, and we need to talk about all those different things, and we want to talk about all those different things. I think you have to start with 20 wins because they did it. Who had this team winning 20 games before the season started? I didn't. I forget what I picked, but I didn't pick 20. I think we went back and looked at the preseason predictions from our site staff at Panther-Lair.com. And I think maybe Houston Wilson, who does a lot of basketball recruiting coverage for us, I think he might have picked Pitt to win 18 games last year. Maybe. Or this season, I'm sorry. I think that might have been his preseason prediction. It feels like last year because we made those predictions in like October or November or somewhere around there. But he had the highest total. Nobody else picked them to win as many as 18. And here they are, 20 wins with 3 more regular season games to go, at least one ACC tournament game, and you would think an NCAA tournament, at least one NCAA tournament game. That's an accomplishment, and I think it's worth recognizing, celebrating, and acknowledging because it's another step for this team as they really continue building something special. Now, they're not going to continue building something special if they keep playing defense the way they have the last 2 games. And while there was improvement in the second half last night, and they got much better in the second half than they were in the first half against Georgia Tech on the defensive end, and they were better in the second half last night than they were against Virginia Tech on Saturday, they still weren't very good. Georgia Tech scored, what did they score in the second half? They only scored 36 points in the second half, but they shot 13 of 24, or excuse me, they shot 12 of 22 from the field, 54.5%. They shot 6 of 13 from 3 in the second half last night. And really, I mean, they were shooting well all game. One of Georgia Tech's biggest problems last night is they were 3 of 15 from 3 in the first half. They end up for the game shooting 32%, but they shot 46% in the second half from outside the arc. If they make a few more of those 3-pointers they took in the first half, or if they just focus on getting the ball inside and shooting inside the arc, where they hit like 11 of 18, I think they shot over 60% from 2-point range in the second half, or in the first half last night. If they focus on getting the ball inside more, that's a different game. I think that was one of the biggest differences, or one of the biggest impacts, and neither coach really talked about it last night, was the 3-point shooting from Georgia Tech in the first half, where they weren't very good. But they were still better than Pitt's defense. Pitt's defense just was an issue again. And, I think on Saturday at Virginia Tech, the defense was the biggest issue. I don't think the offense was a huge issue. It wasn't great. They could have shot better from outside. But the defense was the biggest issue. Last night, I think there were some significant issues on offense as well. Defense is where they need to make major improvements, but the offense just wasn't clicking in the first half. Pitt still shot 40% from the field in the first half, 4 of 11 from 3, but they committed 5 turnovers, and Georgia Tech turned those 5 turnovers into 11 points. A huge amount in what ended up being a 1-point game at halftime. And I think that went a long way in why they were able to, shoot over 60% from inside the arc, is because they were converting turnovers into transition baskets, and they were able to score out of it. Pitt's offense just never really seemed to be able to get into a rhythm, never really seemed to be able to gel in the first half. And I think, in the first half, Pitt made 11 baskets. I feel like about at least 5 of those were fast break baskets, transition baskets, or I think they had one off an inbounds play. Then I think they only made 6 baskets in the first half, really out of their half-court offense, just kind of according to my notes as I jotted them down. They weren't gelling. They couldn't really find their rhythm. And Jeff Capel talked after the game about, Virginia or Georgia Tech uses a lot of different kinds of zone, and it's tough to prepare for, and it's tough to play against because of the way they play. And I mean, that's fine, but how many times can you run into teams that do things like this? I feel like we've heard a number of times. It's really tough when you play against that team because they do this. Or it's tough when you play against that team because they do that. It's tough to play against Florida State because of the way they defend. They defend in such a way that makes it they make it hard to run your offense. Well, if Florida State has discovered a defense that makes it tough to run your offense, everybody should play that defense, right? And it was the same thing, Duke with the way they were doing this or the way they were doing that, and Georgia Tech last night with the way they were defending and the different zones they use. Well, you need to be able to run your offense better. Yeah, I think it comes down to that. And so much of the focus is and should be on defense, and that's got to be Pitt's priority because I think the offense will come back. But they need to be able to adjust their offense and run their offense even when teams mix up and change and use different defenses against them. I'm not sure what the ideal defense is. I mean, we might see it actually on Saturday when they play against the zone, because I think this Pitt team is built well to attack the zone with the three-point shooting and how well they can hit mid-range jumpers. I feel like, Blake Hinson, Jamarius Burton, Nelly Cummings, even Nike Sibandi to a certain extent can get into the zone and find, openings for those mid-range jump shots. And obviously, Burton... Hinson, Greg Elliott, Nelly Cummings, Sibandi can all knock down threes from outside, and that's a great way to break up a zone. But when you're not playing that kind of zone, when you're not playing against that, if you're playing against man or some different types of zone defenses, you need to be able to coach your offense to adjust and to attack and score. And that didn't seem to be happening in the first half last night. It was a big part of the reason they were down. They were up by just 1 point, and it felt like they were down. Second half, they were able to take care of the ball a little bit better. They only committed 2 turnovers in the second half. Georgia Tech didn't score at all off of those turnovers. Meanwhile, Georgia Tech committed 4 turnovers. Pitt got 2 points out of it, but what ultimately ended up being an 8-point game. That's a significant amount. I think there were a few keys in this game. Obviously, Nelly Cummings had a big game, 22 points, 7 assists. Pitt is now 13-3 in games this season when Nelly Cummings has at least 5 assists. I talked on yesterday's Morning Pitt about Blake Hinson being an X factor or a wild card for this Pitt team, that when he scores 16 or more entering the game, entering last night's game, when he scores 16 or more, Pitt was 13-2 this season. Well, he had 19 points last night, so improved that record to 14-2. You're talking about a team that's 20-8, and so that's 28 games. In 16 of those 28 games, Blake Hinson scored 16 plus points. 14 out of their 20 wins, he's been able to put up at least 16 points. Shot really well from outside. He was feeling it. He was 5 of 9 from 3, and he had it. He had that feel, and he had that quick trigger back. And there's something I've been thinking about it the last couple of games, and I think I definitely noticed it in the Virginia Tech game on Saturday, and then watching last night's game. Hinson and Elliott, And Hinson not as much last night. I think he corrected this to some extent. But Greg Elliott, definitely last night. And I think both of those guys probably, to some extent in the Virginia Tech game, seem to have slowed down on the quick trigger. They still shoot. They still like to shoot. They're still good three-point shooters. They have good releases. But particularly, I don't even want to just say early in the season because I think it extended into the early part of this month. So, you're talking about for the first 3+ months of the season, 2+ months of the season, whatever it ended up being, they had such a quick trigger. And I'm talking about Hinson and Elliott in particular, that when they got the ball, if they had just an inch of space, they were firing the shot up. I talked about this after we watched an open practice, that this team had a bunch of guys who, if you are even the slightest bit late on closing out on them, they're going to fire up a three. Not only are they good three-point shooters, but they're very active and hungry and aggressive three-point shooters. So they're going to take those shots whenever they get a chance. And it felt like on Saturday, Virginia Tech, Blake Hinson passed up a number of them. I thought Greg Elliott passed up a couple as well. Last night against Georgia Tech, Hinson took more of those shots. He attempted 9 from outside the arc, but Elliott didn't. Greg Elliott was 1 of 4 from 3 last night. And really, they just... Now, Nelly Cummings shot 9 from outside, so that's where a lot of those shots were going. But I think for the most part, Greg Elliott should be shooting more than 4 3-pointers per game. But he passed up shots that I think he took earlier in the season. I saw him catch passes with a little bit of space, not a ton of space. He wasn't wide open. The 1 3 that he made, he was wide open. But I saw him catch passes where he wasn't wide open, but he had a little bit of space. And he had the kind of space that he was shooting against in January, in December, even in the early part of February, where when he caught the ball, if he had that kind of space, the shot was going up immediately, Last night in the Virginia Tech game, it just looked like he was passing on those shots that he would catch and hesitate. And that was one of the strengths for Elliott and Hinson early this season, is that there was no hesitation. Because when you hesitate, now the closeout is there. And now you've missed your opening, you've missed your opportunity. And so I don't know what's going on with Greg Elliott in that regard. Clearly they went with Nike Sibandi in the second half last night. He played the bulk of the minutes. I had it here. In the second half, Sibandi played 16 minutes and Greg Elliott played 11. Most of Elliott's minutes went to Sibandi because he was playing better, and we'll talk in a second about what he did the best. But Elliott needs to be scoring. He needs to be shooting threes. And when he gets the ball, it has to be his first instinct and his first impulse to put it up. And, particularly if he's got a little bit of space between his man, apart from his defender. The ball needs to go up. I thought Hinson got back to that last night and did a better job with it. Elliott needs to follow suit, because you need both of those guys knocking down, probably between them 6 threes per game, or 7 threes per game. That's where you want to be with those two guys combined, maybe more. Last night they ended up with 6, but that was with Hinson hitting 5. So I need to see that out of Greg Elliott, particularly as they go into this stretch run, and particularly when they play against Syracuse on Saturday. He needs to be able to fire up those shots and have that quick trigger. Now, Nike Sibandi got a lot of playing time, 29 and a half minutes, only scored 2 points, 1 of 2 from the floor. The one basket he missed was a 3-point attempt. The one basket he made was sort of a coast to coast. He grabbed a rebound and went all the way in for the layup. A big play kind of late in the game. And so Sibandi, a couple of low-scoring games here. He had 8 points at Virginia Tech and then 2 points last night. And really his 8 points at Virginia Tech all came in the final 5 minutes. It's not like he made a huge impact on that game. But what he did last night, what Jeff Capel talked about, Jeff Capel was talked about Nike Sibandi's impact, and he right off the bat said it was huge. It was huge. I think he repeated huge multiple times. And it wasn't because of what Sibandi did scoring-wise. It was because of what he did defensively. And if you watch that game, you know that Pitt went to kind of a full-court press defense for a lot of the second half, and Nike Sibandi was the guy really at the top of it, sort of leading the charge on the ball handler, on the guy bringing the ball up. And it was they didn't get any turnovers out of it. None that come to mind. It wasn't some huge success in that regard, but it was able to accomplish a couple things. One, and maybe primarily, it slowed Georgia Tech's offense down, or even maybe put it another way, it limited the amount of time Georgia Tech was able to spend in the front court. As Capel said, running the cuts and the screens and the things that they were doing to really kind of get some open looks and easy shots against Pitt in the first half and the first, few minutes of the second half. But Nike Sibandi led the charge there and played really well defensively. I thought he was a real asset to the team in that regard. They need him to score more. Pitt is 11-1 this season when Sibandi scores in double digits, so that seems like a pretty good correlation to develop if you can. But they also need that defense. And if Sibandi can bring that in addition to some of his sort of energy offensive scoring plays, keep him on the court. Get him out there. Particularly, if Elliott is going to be slow on the trigger from three, and Sibandi's going to keep defending like that, get him out there. Maybe we're going to come close to revisiting the debate about whether Nike Sibandi should be starting. He shouldn't. I don't think you mess with it at this point, and you'll have games like this where Sibandi plays 29 minutes and Elliott only plays 26, and it might even be more of a disparity than that. In future games. But, you stick with the current starting lineup, but Sibandi has shown himself to be useful in a lot of ways this season, not only being a spark off the bench, but in, kind of he's got some versatility in his game, and he can play on both ends of the court and impact the game on both ends of the court. And I think before this season is over, before the regular season ends, we're going to get a couple, at least one more big game out of Nike Sibandi, and maybe two or three. I think he's going to get hot again. And quite frankly, I think Greg Elliott is going to get hot again too. I mean, I'm concerned about the quick trigger slowing down, but I think he'll recoup some of that. The other guy I'm kind of curious about, and I don't want to say, well, one other positive thing, Federico, 8 of 8 from the line. It's huge. It's huge. Federico and Nelly Cummings combined 15 of 15 from the free throw line, but Federico going 8 of 8. In a game that Pitt wins by 8, I mean, it's not a stretch to say that his 8 free throws were the 8 points that decided this game. I mean, he was not that good of a 3-point or a free throw shooter all season, but he was last night, and it was huge. Jamarius Burton, not sure what's going on there. He goes 5 of 11 from the floor last night, makes 2 free throws at the end of the game, finishes with 12 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists, no turnovers. It's a good stat line. 12 points is a good stat line. 3 assists and no turnovers is a good stat line. He plays 28 minutes. He's not, and teams are defending him differently. Teams are attacking him. Teams are coming at him. They know that Jamarius Burton is the guy who makes this thing go. He's not attacking in the way he did even as recently as a few weeks ago. I don't know if he's wearing down a little bit, getting a little tired, or maybe it's just the way teams are approaching him. Maybe it's just the way teams are defending him, and it's become much more difficult, so he's more willing to distribute and share the ball, get his teammates involved. Maybe that's the case. I don't know. But he's not having the same impact that he had earlier this season, when he really did take over games, when he really could take over games. And he had a couple of those plays last night. And he had a couple that didn't go down. So he's not, completely, gassed out there or something like that. But I'm going to be curious to see how he plays over these next 3 games of the regular season, because he's obviously huge. I mean, he has a huge impact on Pitt's success. And, he will have a huge impact on these next 3 games. And then as they get into the postseason, positive or negative. And I don't necessarily think he was having a negative impact last night, but there were so many points this season. There have been so many points this season when Burton has just taken over games, and he didn't really do it last night. And didn't even look like he was really looking to do it last night. He made some big plays. I'm not going to say that he was invisible, but he didn't look like he was really looking to take over the game last night. And to some extent, the Virginia Tech game as well. He's getting a lot of defensive attention. There's no question about it. But I expect Jamarius Burton to play at a pretty high level. And I think Pitt's going to need him to get back to that level as they head toward the postseason. And whether they need to conserve his minutes here in these next 3 regular season games to try and get a little bit of his legs back, if that is the issue, I'm not sure. But, I think Jamarius Burton, if he's in a bit of a valley now, he needs to head back up to the peak pretty soon. You know what I'm saying? Overall, though, a gritty win, as Jeff Capel called it, and Nellie Cummings agreed. They showed some grit. They were down 4 with 12 minutes to go. They battled back. They held off Georgia Tech a number of times. They would stretch the lead out to 6, and then Georgia Tech cut it down again. But they battled, and they battled hard against a team that was dealing with a lot of challenges itself, but was more than up to the task of taking on Pitt and pushing it down to the wire before the Panthers eventually took an 8-point win. But take that win they did. They are now 20-8 overall. And Sydney is, what was it, 13-4? I should know that number off the top of my head, right? 13-4. It's wild times, man. Wild times. Your 20-win Pitt Panthers. Can't believe it. But appreciate you checking us out this morning. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Pitt wins. They're going to move on. They'll take on Syracuse on Saturday. Final home game of the season. So it should be a big one. We'll have a lot to talk about heading into that. Don't go anywhere. Make sure you stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. And, of course, our YouTube channel here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So thanks for watching the video this morning. Hope it's been a great week so far. Hope you have a great Wednesday. And we will talk to you tomorrow morning for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.